Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. You can support WitchLit and the serious book habit it requires at ko-fi.com/WitchLitPodcast. And you can be part of the show by sending in your own death, sex, religion, politics, money questions for our guests to victoria@witchlitpod.com. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and give us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help other witches find the show. Here's to never getting to the bottom of our to-be-read piles. Martha Kirby Capo is a solitary witch currently working with Brigid, Hecate, Pan, and Carnunos. She is the page manager of Patheos Pagan's shared blog, The Agora, where she writes as the Corner Crone. Her moments for meditation can be heard on KPPR Pure Pagan Radio. Martha has been extensively anthologized through Skinner House Books, Flying Cow Productions, and various Llewellyn publications. An award-winning poet and lyricist, she has written for several magazines, including Witchology. Martha has been a presenter at Florida Pagan Gathering, Turning the Tide, and Mystic South, and is a member of Covenant of the Goddess and Circle Sanctuary. Her first book, Thrifty Witchery, co-authored with Vincent Higginbotham, is available for purchase. Vincent Higginbotham is the author of How Witchcraft Saved My Life and co-author of Thrifty Witchery. Mostly self-taught, Vinny is not initiated in any traditional form or witchcraft practice. He follows his gut in all things magic, but spends plenty of time researching to be sure his intuition is informed by wisdom before setting his intentions. It is Vinny's goal to empower others the way he wishes he had been empowered in his early years. He has a dedicated practice with the goddess Hecate and lives in the southeastern U.S. Martha and Vincent, welcome to WitchLit.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. We're so thrilled to be here.
Oh, I'm just excited to have you on. So I didn't really know what to expect with the book because I think I had this idea. I just kind of went in cold, right? I didn't read any of the stuff about it and was expecting it's a book of how to do spells on the cheap. It is so much more than that. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about it. And before we get into the meat of that, though, our first question for everybody on the show is why write in this age of TikTok and every other way you can get the information out? Why write books?
So I'll go first. When I was 8 years old, I wrote a little picture book about a dog that I walked, and her name was Tasha, and it was this horrible thing that I self through and wrote. And that was the moment for me that I was like, oh, I'm going to be an author. And so ever since I was 8 years old, that's all I ever wanted. And then when I started college, I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to go to school and learn how to be a better author. I'm going to take psychology and English classes and writing classes. And I did that for a very brief period of time. And then I changed my major completely to industrial design because I realized that I really liked building things and I liked understanding how the world works. So I switched gears, and then I had this whole breakdown in Philadelphia and realized that I wasn't living my truth. And somebody once said to me, what will make you happy is what your 8-year-old self would have wanted for you. And I was like, well, my 8-year-old self wanted to write. So I just stopped doing everything else. I just kept a regular job and started writing, whether anyone was going to see it or not. And that is the only goal I have. I want to teach the world. I want to change the world with the word. And I think that that's possible with books more than it is with social media or videos or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I was listening to Misha's episode, and I thought, wow, that's exactly what she said is exactly what I think. When I'm writing something down, I'm trying to articulate what do I think about X? How do I think about that? What are the ways I think about that? Why am I thinking about that? And what do I think? And that is really, I think, something when we write, that's what I'm doing. So for this book that Vincent and I wrote, a lot of what I was working through was, okay, what is intuition? Where does that come from? How does that work? What is intention? What's the relationship between intention and intuition? How does that work? Is it a two-way street? Is it, I mean, so really trying to parse out, what do I think about how all of this metaphysical stuff that you're doing work, and then what's that whole gang's relationship with the physical stuff that you do in your craft? And I want to circle back to when you said the book wasn't what you expected, because that's not the first time we've heard that.
Mhm.
We've had 2 or 3 people say, oh, well, I thought it was going to be really kind of thrifting your craft, but there's so much, it's so different from what I expected. And so I think that's something that catches my attention, is that apparently more than one person is having that experience of the book, which I think is nifty. I think that's great.
Yeah. And because I do think there's this thread of talking about, witchcraft as, it does kind of have a material culture around it, right? I mean, and that's especially prevalent on social media, that you have to have these things and it has to be beautiful, and, you got to dress for the part, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really what it's about. It's not really what it was ever about. And I think that you guys take that to heart in the book. I mean, I almost think the title does it a disservice a tiny bit. Just because I think it does set an expectation. And then when you get in the book, there is conversation about witchcraft is you, basically.
Yeah.
Like you are the thing you need to do witchcraft. But it's a lot more than that.
I like the way that it rhymes. But I would say that this is a book about abundance. And I am uncertain that may be a first impression that someone has when they read the title, because there's a tension there, there's a push-pull there. Although I will say that that's also kind of that also kind of demonstrates the tension that is out there in the world that all of us as practitioners feel. So it's evocative of that, I would say that. But it's really about we have a whole lot of work about seeing things through a witch's eyes, hearing with a witch's ears, being able to repurpose things that are already in your life, and using the self-empowerment that you have to do that, which then feeds your self-empowerment because you did that thing.
So, when I think about the book title, Thrifty Witchery, I am reminded of that Macklemore song that came out, I don't know, a while ago at this point, that thrift shop song, and the video, and he's walking around in this fur coat, and fur coats are not cheap, right? They're a luxury. And I think about witchcraft as that fur coat. Witchcraft is that luxury, but he's talking about how he got this at a thrift store. And so it was on the cheap, and it was what was available and what was accessible to him. And that's what that's why I feel like Thrifty Witchery actually is a good way to term it, because it's that the witchery, the witchcraft that we present is accessible to everyone, regardless of your financial, access or abilities. And so you can wear this luscious fur coat of witchcraft and prance around and look fabulous while not spending anything to access that.
I think this is the first time that Macklemore's been evoked on WitchLit, which I have to say I love.
Leave it to me. I will break the mold.
I love that. So, and funnily enough, when I was reading the book, I read in bed, obviously, because I'm reading all the time. And I had to stop. My husband was just about to fall asleep. And I was like, wait. I was like, this is the first time I have seen Are You the God of Hammers? I've seen Marvel Thor evoked in a witchcraft book, and we both laughed out loud for a good long while.
That is
I love
100%
that line.
Martha.
I love that. I love that movie. I watched that. I mean, I'm oddly obsessed with that movie, but it's so true. It's just a tool, and we forget that. We forget that. I've been in some interesting discussions with some practitioners about whether or the quality of the inherent magic in particular herbs or flowers or crystals or rocks around you. And there are some very different points of view out in the witching world regarding the relationship of the magic that is within us and the kinds of energies that are in some of the flora and fauna around us, and how, you know, who gives what, who sparks what, and I think those are interesting conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when Martha and I were writing this book, we took turns on chapters, right? Like she would write something and I'd come in behind and I would add to it, or I would be like, Martha, I don't understand this. Or Martha would be like, Vinny, I don't think this is what you're meaning to say. And just different things, right? And so when I read the part where Martha wrote about Thor and his hammer, I was like, oh my God, I fucking love you. This is why we work so well together. This is exactly what we're trying to say. And you just like nailed it.
And I'm not a pop culture queen. I mean, like my Vinny is like the pop culture king. So usually that's something that would come out of him, but yeah, every once in a while I can be hip.
And I mean, it is such a good encapsulation of what you're trying to say in the book. I mean, it is like just a summary in a line, but plus delivered by Sir Anthony Hopkins doesn't hurt either.
Nope.
So.
Before he just kind of wisps away. It's great.
Yeah, no, like, yeah, I think, honestly, I think of the Marvel movies, that is one of my favorite too. So we talked a little bit before, so I know that you all have known each other for a while, but I'm curious, like, how did you decide to write this book together? Like, what was the seed, I guess, for this kind of journey to write this book and get this out?
Vinny tells a great story about this. So, okay.
So, when I wrote my first book, How Witchcraft Saved My Life, it was the first book I ever wrote, and I was already writing for the Agora, where Martha is the editor. And so I went to Martha and I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Can you just kind of like be here with me and hold space with me and kind of coach me through some of this stuff and make sure that I'm polished? And so from the very beginning, from my proposal, it was Martha and me kind of like working through things and me trying to like figure out how to do it, the whole thing. And then when I wrote the book, I was like, Martha, can you read this before I send it to anyone so that, anything stupid or horrible is taken care of? And she did. And then she wrote my foreword. And so Martha and I have just always kind of had this working relationship without ever having met in person or even spoken on the phone. It was all via text, I think, for a long time, and emails and whatnot. And then she said something to me after the book came out, and she was like, because I was talking to her about what my next project would be. And she was like, I really think that you should dive deeper into the whole, like, not really needing to spend money for witchcraft. And I was like, I think you should write that with me, because we at that point knew how each other kind of approached magic. And we had kind of like walked around in the same circles for a while. So we knew each other a lot better at that point. This is like 2 or 3 years into our relationship.
So, yeah.
And so I was like, I think you should write it with me. And she was like, oh, I don't know. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to give you space and I'll circle back around. And I gave it like a month and a half. And I said, so are we writing the book together or not? And she was like, okay, let's do it. So we wrote 10,000 words and we were like, all right, let's write the proposal now. Because we knew, like, after 10,000 words, we had it. We knew our system. We knew how we worked together. So we wrote the proposal and they gave it to us. And the rest is history. It's just like, she is my writing lobster. If I had to walk around a tank of writers, I would latch on my claw to her claw and walk with her, whether she had someone else or not. She's mine as far as this goes. And that's just, I mean, not to be possessive or anything.
No, but we're writing
lobsters.
I mean, it's a weird, because we've talked to other people who have done co-written books. They do it very differently than we did. And they have particular sections And then one of them doesn't dip on over into the other person's section, whatever that person writes, Ed writes. We're not like that. We're like, one person will write something, the other person comes in, and then we have a conversation if we need to, and then we might pad some more out. I mean, we are interlined, we're interstitched all the way through that book. Like some of the stuff I did some more work on. Some of the stuff Vinny did some more work on, but he was really brilliant when we went back through to do editing. He said, okay, we're going to flip. And here's some of the material that I probably have 80% of what's going on in there. You do your thing with that. Because I didn't really, that just wasn't where I was coming from, and vice versa. And that was just, I found that remarkably helpful, because I can get way up in my head sometimes. I mean, I kind of live in my head. And so things make sense to me that when I get them down on paper or I start speaking them, people are looking at me like, the words are English, but I have no idea what they mean when she puts them together that way. And I needed that. I really needed somebody. He's a fire. And I'm a fire, water. And so, but he still was so grounding for me to try to get me to really quantify some of these intangible thoughts that were just sort of flying around and made sense in my head. I so value Vinny. I just so value him.
Well, the thing is that like where Martha kind of lives from her head, I sort of live from my gut or heart, I guess you could say, even though like it's not really the heart, it's your gut, right? But like this book is very much head and heart/gut. And she like really brings that headspace to the book. And I think brought that kind of like gut space. Like this is this visceral kind of experience that when we put them together, it makes for a really unique kind of approach to magic. And what's really amazing is that as we wrote the book, we were rereading and editing. And I was like, Martha, I don't know who wrote this. I don't know if it was me or you. And then she would look at it and be like, I don't know who wrote this either. Like, you can't tell. Aside from some of the practices and exercises, which are like, some of those practices are very Martha and some of those practices are very me. And it really reads as its own, like, kind of distinct voice in those ways. But when you read the meat of the book, you can't, like, it's one voice. We really came together as one voice. And neither one of us, aside from like small things like the Thor's hammer, can really like look at the book and pinpoint, oh, this is something Martha said, or this is something Minnie said. Because so much of it was like, there were sentences where I'd write out a sentence and then Martha would come in and change like 20 words in the sentence. And then every other word was Martha, Vinnie, Martha, Vinnie, Martha, Vinnie, and other sentences. And sometimes it's like paragraphs that are like that. And sometimes it's like, we talk about the right word to use for a specific place, right? Because synonyms are a whole thing. And
they really are.
When, like, I mean, we had a conversation about whether or not to, what is it when instead of cannot, you write can't? That's called a
contraction. A contraction.
Thank you. See, this is why Martha is my lobster, because she has the answers when I don't.
And we had a big
this whole
conversation.
discussion. A big conversation over contractions. I was like, Martha, I don't think we were using contractions here. I said, there are books, like I write, my first book has contractions. I don't think this book has contractions. And like, we both kind of, I mean, we didn't argue, but we went back and forth. We had like a very adult conversation about why she felt like we could and why I felt like we couldn't. And we kind of came to this right ground where we both agreed and moved forward. And I was like, look, if they don't like it, if they want to add the contractions, they'll do it later. And she was like, I agree. Like, we meld really well do. And become one.
I think that's part of the energy of the book too, because we are so different. I mean, we're really, I am a cis, white, hetero, 65-year-old from a really privileged background. And Vinny is I think you're 40 now, right?
I'm 42 at the end of the month.
Good Lord. 42. I mean, really, if I'd gotten jiggy with it, I could be his mother. And he's, he has a completely different life path, things that I can't wrap my head around. And there are things in my life that he can't wrap his head around. But we felt like if we could find common truths that resonated with both of us, then we were probably onto a truth that would resonate with a lot of people, that because it was not slippery, there was enough room in whatever that truth was for people to be able to resonate with it from whatever their point of view or whatever their life experience had been.
Yeah. And I sit between you all, like age-wise, probably experience-wise too, somewhere in there. So yeah, I mean, it resonated with me. But I'm an N of one, but I assume that other people are also having the same experience. But what you said about, and what you all said about, it melding, like I usually have been kind of able, like when I've read books that are written by two people, like kind of been able, like you said, to pick apart, like, the different voices, even if I don't know who to attribute them to, you can usually see. No, I agree. Like
It's seamless.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised that like it was just like, oh, was this really written by two people?
And we didn't meet each other until Mystic South last year, 2022. We had never been in the same room with each other before.
And you were already writing together at that point? Or?
We'd finished the book.
The book was finished before we met in person.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
I mean, it was wild. It was just wild.
Martha is the only person that I call on the phone.
Because I'm old. I never knew that a couple of generations behind me that they would text first before they called to make sure it was okay to call, because in my generation you pick up phone and call.
Yeah.
And so that was it's one of the delightful things that I found out.
And
being in a partnership.
Because every time I needed to talk, every time I found like we needed to talk about something, I'd be like, "Can we talk today?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm good now."
Sure.
I'm like, "Oh, okay." And now I'm at a place where I'm like, yesterday I just called her. I didn't text her
I was
anything.
like, "Oh wow, look at that!"
And I was like, "Okay, I can do this. This is okay." Like, but if she did it to me, I'd be like, "What is happening right now?
What is going on?" Yeah. Well, and I think part of it. This is my theory on that. This is Victoria's theory of why we text before we call. Because I'm an Xer and I do it too. But and I think part of it is because there is no escape now. Like, when I was in college, if my parents wanted to talk to me, they had to find me at home. Like I had to be in my apartment for them to talk to me and answer the phone. And now
there were no
right. Yeah. So now you can't escape. So I think it's just a courtesy thing. Like, are you somewhere you can talk? Do you want to talk? That, because you can't ever escape it. It's there all the time. So, but yeah, I kind of like that. I like that. So I guess so clearly you're different people. You write very similarly and you come to this. I think, you obviously were able to meld this. But like physically, how do each of you write? Do you have your own rituals? Like what is like your best writing day? Like it's something I like to talk to authors on the podcast for, because I think it's important for people to hear that everybody has their own way of doing it. So it's, even though it is like kind of a stereotypical question, I do like to ask, because I think it's important for new writers, especially to hear that there is no right way.
Yeah. So for me, writing is a daily practice that has evolved over time. When I wrote my first book, I wrote it from my phone, and I wrote it in like stolen moments. Like I'd be at the gym and I would be walking on the treadmill and I'd be writing, or I would leave the gym and go sit in my car and write for an hour on my phone in Google Docs. And then on my lunch breaks, I would do the same thing. And then with this book, I changed that whole system, and I started waking up at 3 a.m. to write for like 2 or 3 hours. And then throughout the day, like on a lunch break or something, I would take the time to talk to Martha. Or when I started working from home, I would have conversations with her while I was working. And because I don't have to speak while I'm working because I do digital support. So it's all typing. So I can actually like type and do my job and have a conversation with Martha at the same time. And so there was a lot of that for this book. And then currently, like the thing that I'm working on now, it's just that same routine. Like I wake up at 3 o'clock, I write for about 2 hours, and then I'm done. I put it aside and I don't touch it until Monday. Like it's Monday through Friday is when I do it. Weekends are not for that. Weekends are for social media building and interviews and stuff. And then I just move forward. And as I'm working on something, if I feel stuck on like a chapter, I will stop working on it and do another chapter. So like right now I'm working on a chapter that's really rough for me. So I'm like, I'm not touching this. I'm going to move on to another subject, write that out, and then maybe revisit this. And that's something that I think Martha and I do very different, because as we were working on this, I was like, Martha, we don't have to do this in order. And like, I think that I kind of taught her that approach.
You really did. You really did.
And I think that it's helping her right now with her current project. But like, conversely, right now, I have been working chronologically through my book that I'm working on now. And I just like had this conversation with Martha yesterday. I was like, oh yeah, right. I told Martha that you don't have to do this. Why am I doing this right now? And it was a reminder. So there really is no wrong way. But I think that also it is not something that is going to stay static. It's never going to be the same for every book. It's always going to be changing, because you learn new things that work for you as you go. If that makes sense.
And mine, I couldn't be more different. Because Vinny's right. I do have a tendency to be extraordinarily linear. And what I'm finding in my current project, which is just on my own, I'm not collaborating with anybody, is that I had to do that until I got to a certain word count where I had enough heft, like enough dough to actually start kneading the dough. And it's been easier for me, and I hear Vinny's voice like in my head, to kind of skip back and forth with sections and maybe go back and pad something out. And my I do a lot of editorial work. And so I think that sometimes is a disservice to me when I'm writing a book, because my inclination is to go back in and kind of do a little bit of editorial work when it's not really ready for that yet. Matt Aron has said that when he writes, he just slaps that stuff down. He slaps that stuff down, and he doesn't go back. He may make a notation about a citation that he needs to fill out later on, or footnotes, but he doesn't stop to do the footnotes, which I do. He doesn't stop to add in the bibliography, which I do. He just writes the words down. And I'm trying to take more of that mindset with this current project, to just don't be so judgy about what I'm writing. Just get enough dough together so that I can go back and kind of start massaging that mass and shaping it into something. Technically I'm retired. So technically I should be able to write 7 days a week. That is not what my life is like. There's a lot of other stuff going on. So I only get Tuesday through Friday that I can feel like I'm going to be uninterrupted enough, except for the dog, to actually get something done. And so I try to get down and sit and write for the morning. I try to get 1,000 words in the morning, and that's my hard goal. My soft goal is 2,000 a day. But I really don't stop for lunch until I've got that 1,000 words down. And then everything else that I'm doing then I kind of break out to that. Now that said, it's hard to write. It's hard. You meet yourself, you kind of meet, and these things that you thought about yourself. Oh, I would never miss a deadline. I would never not find something to write about. Well, guess what? You kind of do. And so now you find out, okay, who am I in this tough spot? Who am I? And what is my character, I guess? Yeah. How do I deal with this, with this inability, or I get up in my head a lot. So I can have a lot of self-defeatist talk. Particularly my current project is about quantum physics and magic making. I'm not a physicist. So that section of the book was really difficult for me, because I was like, why am I writing about this? I have no training. I have never even worked in any capacity at all in a science environment, but I get to ask questions. Scientists aren't the only ones who get to ask questions. I get to ask them. I get to find out what I think the answers are. I get to do the research and do that. The second half of the book, where it's much more based in spiritual stuff, that's going better. But I mean, you just you do what you can do, man, and you have to be okay with that. You have to really be okay with yourself, and the progress you make is the progress you make.
I actually like cast spells around what I'm working on when I'm writing in order to kind of open up or help myself. Like I have like 7-day candles, and I have this whole system where I add my blood to them and I make this like kind of offering. And it's not like crazy blood or anything. I'm just using one of those like little diabetic testing trick things. And I do this every day, and then I light it and I like talk to my deity and I'm like, hey, be my guide. This is my torch. Help me find my way out of the darkness. And then when I get really, really stuck, I just hold the candle and I go, hey, I need some like guidance right now. Like, can you shed some light on this path and help me move forward? And then there are other moments where, like yesterday was a really bad one. I just started feeling a whole bunch of imposter syndrome. Like, can I actually write this book? And I had to remind myself that I've already done it twice, so I can do it. But like, it still happens. I don't care if I'm writing the 50th book. I'm going to have that moment where I'm not sure I can actually do it. And then you reel yourself back in. And I think that the main thing about writing, the main thing that any author needs to remember, or writer in general, maybe you're not published or whatever, but no matter what you're doing, is you just have to remember that you're doing it for you. And it's not really about, like, I don't write for money. I write because I have a voice and I want that voice to be heard. And I want to give that voice as much room to be heard as I can. And when I was 18 and homeless and reading at like open mics, it was that same reason, right? So like now that it's being published in books, it's just a larger audience, but it's still just an open mic. And guess what? There's no room at the end. Like, it is inundated with people, and I'm probably going to be sleeping in the manger where some baby is being born. And that's okay, because like, that's where I'm at, and that's fine. Like, whatever.
Yeah,
I think that that's something that authors don't think about sometimes, is that like, it's okay to not be the international bestseller, and it's okay to just be this tiny little person who sold 1,000 books because you did it. That's 1,000 more people who heard your voice, right?
Yeah. I think too that I think that imposter syndrome thing is I mean, I know that is a real thing. And I saw something this morning in one of the writers groups that I'm in. It said, the publisher doesn't give you a contract because they're kind. They give you a contract because you have financial potential. And that was just like, because, I come from a generation in a region of the country. I'm from Texas. We as women were taught that people were being kind, that not that we were worth it, not my generation, but that, they're being gracious and kind to us. Aren't they kind? Aren't they kind to us? But no, I have financial potential. Somebody sees that in me. Well, if somebody else sees that in me, what's keeping me from seeing that in myself? Yeah. And I thought, I'm going to put that up on a screen or something where I can see that, is that they're not being kind to me. They're not. I can have friends there, but they're not being kind to me. They see something in me. They see potential, financial potential.
Yeah, they're not publishing you because they want to do a good deed. That's not a thing.
But I think that was something that was lurking like in the back of my head, that I wasn't aware until that light was shined on that. I didn't even know it was there. And I think that's just that really turns my head around about a whole bunch of stuff. Well,
and I think you both touched on this, and I think it's a thread, I think, with all writers I talk to off the show, like my friends who are writers, is that every time you step into a new project, whether it's a fiction book or a nonfiction book or a poem or whatever you write, it is kind of like you have forgotten how to do this, because it is its own creature. It is a new space. Even if I'm currently writing my 7th book, and every morning I'm like, what am I doing?
Why am I doing this? Why did I think I could do this?
Why did I think I could write this book? Why am I the person to write this book?
It's like having a child. Like I have a 20-year-old and I have an 11-year-old.
I don't want 7 children, but yeah.
Listen, but you know what I'm saying? I don't want 7 children either. I mean, I'm struggling at 2 because I just learned their birthdays, and one's 20 and one's 11. So, but they're like 2 totally different approaches. And so how I would have approached the 20-year-old when he was 11 is vastly different as to how I approached the 11-year-old who is currently 11, right? Mm-hmm. Because they have different personalities and your books have different personalities. And so like, yeah, how do I do this is a totally valid thing because I don't know how to do it with my youngest any more than I knew how to do it with my oldest. But I know that how I did it with my oldest is not going to work with my youngest, you know? Mm-hmm. And so like, that's just all part of the system, I think, is that every experience is unique in itself, even if it seems like it's the same experience that you had before with something else.
I have something to say about this because I think, this just kind of popped in my head just now. I really think when you're writing a book, you're creating a thought form. Now, whether it is for everybody else, that's not what we're talking about here. You are creating a thought form, essentially an egregore of a distillation of something that has been birthed in you and has moved from the metaphysical into the physical. That's an act of magic. You're doing an act of magic when you're writing. And I'm not certain how many people think about that when they or experience that as a magic making project, a moment of making magic. When they're in the grind of actually trying to get these words out and trying to make everything make sense. But you're creating you're giving birth to like a thought form and an egregore when you're writing a book. And that's hard. And it should be hard. You know, if it's going to have integrity and if it's going to be able to really take its life from you and then be birthed into the public sphere and start receiving that energy and mixing its energy with all the readers' energies, that's profound. It should be daunting a little bit, but you can't let it. I mean, I asked Tom one time. I said, "Why am I afraid of my own words? Why am I afraid of my own words? They're my words. I made them. Why am I afraid of them?" And that was something that I had to really kind of get through in one of the rough spots of this current project. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that maybe a lot of people who write go through, have an experience of.
Yeah. Oh, no, I definitely have that experience. And I think the other side of that too is that once you kind of accept that you have no control over it once it's out in the world.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Like every person who reads that brings their own experience and their own lens to it, and it becomes a new thing. With every reader, it's a new thing that you have no control over, and they may take totally different, and that feels like a responsibility too. So
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting what, I've had people, I had a friend once who was, had preached, she was preaching from notes, preaching like she didn't freebase or anything like that. And she had somebody come up to her afterwards and say, I disagree when you said X, Y, Z. And she said, well, she looked at her notes. She never said that. You don't know what people are going to hear. You don't know what they're bringing to the relationship. You have no idea what is going to trigger somebody. You can be careful and try, but you don't know. And you can't take responsibility for for what's going on in another person's psyche. Mm-hmm. You can be respectful of it and you can try to be careful with it. But in the end, what's going on with that person is that person's responsibility to figure it out. Mm-hmm. That is, you can only be as clear.
You can only be as clear as you can be. I mean, I think that is the thing. And I mean, I think there's a little bit of difference between writing nonfiction and fiction in that way. Like, people can argue with your fiction. Like, I wish you hadn't, but in the end of the day, like, it's fiction, right? I mean, it's your story to tell.
That's right.
And they can argue with it and they can hate what so-and-so did in the book or whatever, but But like when it's nonfiction, they can come and say, oh, no, you're wrong. Even if you're not, you can still have that. So that, I think that difference makes it a little bit more fraught sometimes, but not necessarily.
That's what I think. That's one of the things that can really get me up in my head about this second book, because the first half of it is all about quantum physics. And I ain't no physicist,
Most people aren't, though.
yeah. But I mean, I would like to think that whatever it is that I'm writing has enough integrity that purely scientific people would be able to look at it, not that they ever will, and say, well, she's not an idiot.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Oh, that's a topic.
I'm gonna get that.
That's a topic to wrap your brain around. Like, and like some of those things in quantum physics, like when you start thinking about them, it just makes your head hurt.
Slippy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suspect the three of us can talk forever, but in the interest of sort of keeping us under an hour, I'm going to move on to a question. So one of the things before I have you guys plug and we do our game of chance at the end is I really want to ask, because I think this is really important with this book, with Thrifty Witchery especially. It's like, what do you want as the writer? Like, since we've talked about this, you put this thought form out in the world. What do you want readers to take away from this book at the end? What is the thing you really want them to get from here?
I want people to be empowered. This is always my goal and everything that I write in probably the whole world, but especially the witchcraft community. I want to empower people. When I wrote my first book, when we wrote this book, when I'm writing my third book, I want to empower people to do things as they see fit and know that they can, that opening is there, that this is something that has existed long before publishers like Llewellyn existed, right? And this is something that existed long before the witch trials. And this is something that existed like before we had words. We were using magic, right? I mean, like there might not be historical evidence to that, but it is impossible to think that we haven't always been attempting to manifest our desires. When they're out on the hunt and they're like, oh, if I put the blood on my face, it's going to help me. Like this is magic. And so what I want to do is empower people to use magic as they see fit and find the magic within themselves. Because at the end of the day, specifically with this book, I don't think that it is necessary to have all these things in order to make magic. You can use a bottle cap off of a milk container and it can be just as powerful as the amethyst sitting on your altar, because you are assigning the meaning and the magic to it. And I just want people to be empowered to be able to do that.
I think I want people to think. I want them to think about. But in several magical circles, there's this construct of the magical world and the mundane world, and I kind of think all of it's magical. It's how you are. It's how you're choosing to interact with the world around you. You need to be open in another format. You might be saying open to grace. You need to see and think about what it is you're interacting with all the time. And I also think I want people. Mentorship is a big thing. I mean, I am a mentor, and having mentors and teachers is a real thing. That's what books do. Books teach. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any, because if I said there shouldn't be any, then I wouldn't be on the show. But I do think it is a thing to step away sometimes from your mentors and your teachers, and do a little exploration on your own to see what kind of works for you. Now, if you're in a lineaged system, or if you are in a system that is specific to a teacher, that you can count your teachers back through several generations, do what your teachers are telling you to do. I'm not saying, eschew your teachers. I'm not saying that. I am saying that it's difficult for us as learners, first like in school, and then as we kind of come up in the world, we grow, we age, to sometimes step out of that role of always being taught by someone else, and to step into the role of having the confidence to be your own teacher. to try it and see what happens. That I think is maybe the main thrust of the book for me, to really see the entire world as magic, as having magical potential, as having the spark is already there. And not to separate things into mundane and magical, but to look at how you have cataloged them. How have you put them in boxes, and do they really need to stay in those boxes? And how will that empower you and your magic when you kind of get rid of the labels?
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Well, and I think, it's been my journey to unpick that magic and mundane thing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I hope people will pick up the book and get that from it, because I think it's there. And I will never look at a yard sale the same now. So
I'm setting up all of my workshops for different festivals. And so, there's a project in there where you're repurposing letter tiles from a popular word formation game that will remain unnamed. And so that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to when I go on my tiny little workshop tour, because I don't do a lot of them, is really showing people, look, you can take these things that, if you have your word formation game and it's missing a few letters or whatever, it's not useless. Let's use it for use it for divination. Let's use it to learn a little bit more about what's going on in us spiritually. And here's how you can do that.
Yeah. No, I really like that. So this episode is going to air like mid-May. So I want to give you both an opportunity to kind of plug what you're doing, where to find the book, where to find you on social media if you do that. And then we'll get into our game of chance.
Okay. Vinny, you go first.
Okay, so I am currently working on my third title. It's to be determined as far as the name goes, but it's roughly about finding time for daily practice, even though you might be a busy witch. And I am promoting my book and other authors' books on TikTok and Instagram. I love the TikTok. It's my favorite right now. And I get a lot of joy out of making reels and videos. So you can definitely find me on TikTok. I want to say my name is Vincent Higginbotham on TikTok. Really, if you go and search Vincent Higginbotham on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter, you're going to find me, because I don't think there's very many Vincent Higginbothams out there.
There's
but
only
it's
one
definitely.
It is nice to have a unique name. I too appreciate being
helpful.
One of very few.
So. Right. It's very helpful. If you just Google my name, you can find me. But the best way to find me is to go to www.vinnywrites.com. And that's VINI, and then writes, like I write things. And all of my socials are there. All of the books that I'm working on or that I've published are there. You can go buy them from there. And that is the number one way to find me and what I'm doing at any moment.
Awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm not quite as professionally literate as Vinny is. I'm on Instagram. I have a couple of pages on Facebook. One is my personal page, Martha Kirby Capo, and the other one is The Corner Crone. I've been doing a lot of book reviews lately in my column on Pathos Pagan, which is also The Corner Crone. But really, other than Instagram and Facebook, I don't do TikTok, and I am no longer on the Bird app. I am on Mastodon occasionally, but I'm just not on there all that much.
Mm-hmm.
I've got this book, then I'm working, on this second book that, it's going to come out eventually. And then I'll be at, I'll be at Mystic South in July. That's my big thing that I go to. And hither and thither at smaller things. Between now and then.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah. I left my accounts on the Bird app because I don't want someone to take my business account handles, but I'm not there either. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just stalk people on that app. I don't really post there. I was like, oh, maybe I should try. And then I did for like a day.
Yeah.
Like, no,
I do
just
like
read what other people
Mastodon,
say.
but it is a very different experience.
It really, really is.
Yeah.
And then it's part of one of those things. It was like something that was new, and I thought, I have got to stay with this manuscript. I cannot get.
Yeah.
This can't suck my time. I have got to stick to, because I can't face my editor at Mystic South unless I have this thing turned in. And
she's like, no, hard deadline.
She said, I'll still be happy to see you, even if I give you editor's side eye. And I was like, no, you need to not underestimate the motivating power of potential mortification.
Yeah.
So
I feel you there.
That's why I only post on TikTok, because I can take my TikToks and then cross post them to Instagram. Yeah. So like, it's one day a week that I set up for my whole week, and then I'm good.
Yeah. I would personally like to burn social media to the ground in general. I just hate it, but it's useful. It's a useful tool.
It's useful.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So we will get on to our game of chance. So if you've listened to episodes, you know how this works. So I will roll a die, and depending on what I roll, you'll get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money. And if I roll a 6, you get to pick what you want. This game also has no rules, so you can skip if you don't want that topic. And you can both answer the same question, or you can get your own question. So which would you prefer?
Ooh. I don't know. You want to get our own?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do.
Cool. All right. So who would like to go first?
Vinny.
Martha.
Okay. I'll go first. I heard that tone of voice. I heard that.
Okay. Martha, this one will be for you. 3, religion.
Oh, wow.
So you both have devotional practices to deities that you mentioned in your bios. So you, Martha, have, I think, 4 deities you mentioned in your bio. So would you be willing to share how you were drawn to work with one of those deities? And if that impacts your writing at all, if you have...
I can talk about Hecate all darn day.
Okay.
And that was an interesting, Hecate was having a moment several years ago. And so that would be an interesting conversation to have. Okay, what's the nature of that? What was happening there? But I was part of that moment. That was really, and when I first started learning more about Hecate, I thought, oh no, I no, this is not for me, and walked away for several months. But then kind of came back in again and said, okay, I think I'm ready to really kind of see where this is going to go. And that has been an extraordinarily helpful experience. I would say that Hecate is the main deity that I have a relationship with, and a growing relationship with Bridget. And here's one thing I will say is that in this part of the world, I'm in the United States, monotheism is like the default, right? And so there came a point when I was in my, I wouldn't say comfortable, but an established relationship with Hecate, that I found myself wondering, am I taking the model of monotheism as I learned it as a child in a Protestant setting, and mapping that onto the relationship that I have with a single deity in paganism? And if I am, how do I address that? And so for the longest time, I was just Hecate, moved over to also with Bridget, and I'm comfortable with that. But then I thought, I want to open myself up to some either some energy that has some non-feminine, as we define it, aspects to it. And so that opened me up over to Pan, because I thought, I really, if I'm going to not be sort of knee jerking back into monotheism, but doing it under a pagan umbrella so it looks okay, I need to be mindful about that. And so, there's a little bit of a daily practice that I do. I'm trying to establish a relationship with Carnunos. It's extraordinarily subtle. And sometimes I need to be walked upside the head. And that's not exactly like Carnunos's, strut. So, but it's something that I don't want to give up on either, because again, I don't want to default back, and I need to really do some self-examination, navel gazing, I guess, and make sure that I'm not just heading off with one deity, and now that's monotheism by any other name. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's my very long answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I know that you two have a UU background.
I do. Vinny doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't think you do.
I meant you, as in two TOO.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Homonyms,
okay.
they're my fave.
Yeah, homonyms are the best.
My husband's actually, aren't they? My husband's actually a UU minister. So that's an interesting, he is like my biggest supporter. But UU spaces are interesting places to own your witchcraft in. UU spaces are very comfortable with nature, nature specific manifestations of a person's spirituality, but there's still a little othering that happens, and I guess that's endemic to the word witch. But that has been interesting. It hasn't been until I came down to this congregation here in Miami that honestly, the first time I set foot in the congregation, somebody came up and said, "Oh, your husband tells me you're a witch." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." I can do that here. It's been great. It's been great.
Well, and I know I was involved with UUs for a long time, and I do think that there is not monotheism, but that idea that it's all the same thing. That the universalism of Unitarian Universalism is that what is the same light shines through many windows approach. And so, yeah, I kind of wonder about that too with my own practice sometimes. So, yeah, awesome. All right. So, Vinny, you're up. Like how I just called you Vinny. Yay. Like we've been friends for years.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I like being called Vinny. So
do you want your own question?
Religion.
You want your own question?
Well, yeah, let's do my own question.
Okay. And I'm looking at my own thing. So politics.
Oh no.
After that?
I was scared of this. Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Or you can decline and do another one.
You can also decline and get another question.
No.
Okay.
I like the challenge.
Okay. So do you have a political or social issue that you approach with witchcraft, and are you comfortable sharing that?
I don't actually have a political or social view that I approach with witchcraft. I do have a really open mind to politics, and that's kind of the same approach that I have to witchcraft, is that none of it's probably right, and there's probably parts of all of it that are a little bit right and a little bit wrong. And so that's just kind of my approach to politics. And I think that I don't know, in terms of politics, I think that they're doing it wrong, just in general. Like nobody is doing it correctly. Very specifically, I have very, very real views on things like abortion, because I don't think that any man should be in the room for those discussions. And I don't think that it should only be politicians in the room for those discussions. And so I think that in terms of witchcraft, how that pertains is that, witchcraft, we were talking before we started recording about how, for women in the witchcraft community, it's a lot safer than a lot of other communities are, because it's very empowering towards the feminine in whatever way you term feminine, whether it's biological or, whatever. And so I just think that in terms of politics, how I would be approaching something like a political issue such as abortion would be that men should not be involved in that conversation in general, and that it should be a gaggle of different kinds of women, like politicians and lawyers and doctors and waitresses and, stay-at-home moms and super Christian people and super atheist people, and just the whole spectrum of women should be sitting down and having these conversations, because for me, witchcraft is very much about the feminine. Like I am obviously I'm obviously a male. Like I present as a male, I live as a male, I was born a male, but like I think that I'm an incredibly in touch with my feminine side as a male, not because I'm gay, but because I just understand that there's a duality in all of us. Mm-hmm. And so I think that approaching witchcraft is very feminine to me because I prefer a goddess over a god. And I only work, you guys were talking about the monotheistic kind of approach to witchcraft. And while I am a polytheist, I do believe in many gods. And I have worked with other gods in the past, even before calling myself a witch. It's always been goddesses that really mean something to me. So I think that my approach to witchcraft is very respectful of femininity. And I think that in politics, especially considering women and their bodies, my approach is the same. Like I respect femininity and I'm a feminist. Like I 100% am dyed in the wool feminist. And I just want women to have all the power. Like men are fucking it up. So like probably women can do a better job.
Yeah, at least give us a shot.
I don't know if that answers
right?
the question or not. So
no, I think it does. And I mean,
cool.
I mean, one of the things about these questions at the end, you know, since you both have either are from or have lived in the South, you know, they're topics we're not supposed to talk about in polite company. Right? And I feel like that's where the work gets done, is talking about these things publicly. So that's part of the impetus for the game of chance question. So yeah, awesome. I think it does answer it.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both so much for being on the show. This has been a lovely conversation and I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I highly recommend people pick it up. And you know, when you get your next books finished, let's talk. So
yay.
Yay.
Thank you so much for having us on today. I really appreciate it. It's been a blast talking with you.
Oh, Victoria, you're it's always so affirming when you're talking to someone who really knows what they're talking about, you know, and you, I appreciate your interview style and I appreciate what you're bringing to the microphone because it's super affirming to us as fellow practitioners of the craft to be with someone who really knows their stuff and is gracious about sharing space. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. You're gonna make me cry.
Well, rub your nose on a cat.
That's right. He's not too far. Well, thank you both. And like I said, seriously, let's talk again. So
absolutely.
For sure.
WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shanekar. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram at witchlitpod. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.